Well, welcome everyone to our first of four Wayne State University sesquicentennial panel discussions. Thank you for attending. We're excited to launch these and we're excited that you're here. This panel discussion is Wayne State and Title IX, and I feel confident that each of the speakers is going to offer us some really compelling information that's engaging and interesting. I'm Allison Stancroft. I'm the University Archivist here at Wayne State, and these panels will give us the opportunity to highlight larger societal changes and Wayne's part in them through time. We're also honored to have the sponsorship of the Commission on the Status of Women here at Wayne State for this event. And we can thank them for the amazing Avalon cookies in the back, so have a treat or two. And with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our great panelists. So kind of the housekeeping here is we'll allow each of them to speak, and then we'll invite you, all of you, to chime in and ask them questions that you have. So I think you'll agree with me that you'll find that each of the panelists have a diverse set of expertise and experience in talking about Title IX and what it is actually, and the broad territory that it covers in making education equal and safe ground here in America. And so briefly, they're going to get more into it, into the definition, obviously, but just a super brief sort of description is here projected in the back that should be a nice kind of tip-off point for us. So I want to introduce our amazing panelists. First, we have Teresa Arist. She's Wayne State University's athletics chief of staff. She oversees 7 Wayne State athletics teams, including men's and women's basketball, men's and women's cross country, women's indoor and outdoor track and field, volleyball, as well as softball, and she's been chairing the department's Centennial Anniversary Committee. It's a lot. She comes with strong previous experience, including leadership in athletics at Nardin Academy, Niagara University, and Walsh University. She herself was a student athlete, graduating as Grove City College's second leading career scorer with 1,347 points. She was also a so
years ago. ancient history there, but go ahead. Okay.
She was also 2-time first team All Presidents Athletics Conference PAC selection. She has a master's degree in sports administration from Slippery Rock University. Next, we'll hear from Wayne State University's professor of psychology, Antonia Abbey, PhD. She received her doctoral degree in social psychology from Northwestern University and has a long-standing research interest in women's health, substance abuse, and reducing violence against women. She published extensively, and much of her research has been funded by the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. She has served on a variety of national advisory committees focused on sexual assault prevention and etiology for the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, the National Institute of Justice, and the Pentagon. In 2016, Dr. Abbey received the American Psychological Association Division's 35 Strickland Daniel Mentoring Award, and beginning January of this year, she became editor of the journal Psychology of Violence. Our final panelist is Linda Galante, who is Associate General Counsel in the Office of General Counsel here at Wayne State University. She is a graduate of the University of Michigan at Dearborn and also has a law degree cum laude from Wayne State University. Ms. Galante represents the university in a wide variety of litigation and administrative matters, handles student affairs issues, including participation in the university's behavioral interventions team, assists in ensuring compliance with Title IX and the Clery Act, and provides advice to university personnel on legal issues relevant to higher education. Ms. Galante has served as the university interim Title IX coordinator for the last several years and works closely with Wayne State Police, Dean of Students, who is the Title IX deputy coordinator, and the Office of Equal Opportunity on all matters related to Title IX. She is currently also working with the Vice President and General Counsel to interview candidates for the permanent full-time position of Title IX Director. With no further ado, I'll let our fantastic panelists take it from here.
Thank you, Allison, for that introduction. It's an honor to be a part of this panel and celebrating Wayne State's 150th anniversary, and I'm wimping out and saying, So I was fortunate to be born around the time that Title IX was passed in 1972. I fell in love with sports at a really young age, and I was called a tomboy, which I thought was an appropriate description of me at that time. And it was also assumed that I must have brothers if I was involved in sports. I did not. Then there were the innocent and overt comments that were said to me that really hurt, and society's mixed messages about my place in the male-dominated sports world. It wasn't until graduate school that I really began to understand my experiences as a girl and a woman in the sports arena. And one of the many lessons I learned was that actually I wasn't a tomboy, a girl acting like a boy. I was an athlete that happened to be a girl. Graduate school was also a time that I intimately came to know Title IX, how it came about, its controversy, what it meant for schools and universities receiving federal funding. Title IX is an amendment of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It changed education and revolutionized sports, making discrimination based on sex illegal. Opportunities to participate in sports at the scholastic and intercollegiate athletics for women, the underrepresented sex, grew immensely. At the time, lawmakers did not know that this would become a sports law because the word athletics or sports wasn't in the text. So now I will give you just a brief history of women in sports starting in the 1960s. It will be brief. But while incorporating a bit of Wayne State history too, my focus is gender only and will not include race, class, or sexuality. After World War II, the philosophy that women belonged in the home resurfaced. Doctors were leaders in determining what sports were appropriate for women so that it would not jeopardize their femininity or their fertility. And many female physical educators followed their lead, promoting activities that were appropriate or best for our ladies, like walking or jogging and organizing the infamous play days. In the late 1960s, sport leaders emerged from the women physical educators who rejected men's approach to sports and were advocating for a new athletic model. So this is reflective in Wayne State's history. I learned that our own female physical educators, physical education teachers, formed started to form their own teams in the late 1960s. So basketball, field hockey, track and field, volleyball, and they set up their own schedules. They had to come up with their own uniforms. They had to, and they scheduled teams such as Eastern Michigan, University of Michigan, Central. And so they had to find their own way there to play. But they were varsity-like sports, but were considered extramurals because obviously they're playing teams outside of Wayne State, and they were not under the athletics department. We also have 2 women that we inducted into our Athletics Hall of Fame that pursued sports out of Wayne State because obviously if you were part of the physical education program, you could get involved in sports, but that was the only way. Cynthia Joyette swam the breaststroke on the gold medal winning medley relay team at the 1964 Olympics in Tokyo. And Jeannie Melanchuk, Chuck is a 3-time Olympic speed skater at the 1960, 1968, and 1972 Winter Olympics. She also holds 14 national speed skating titles, more than anyone in the history of the sport. In the 1970s, women began to criticize the exclusion of girls and women in sports and also acknowledge the inequalities if girls and women did have the opportunity to compete in sports. The Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, AIAW, was founded in 1971, and it allowed women to organize themselves and provide a very different sports governance model compared to the men. So you have to understand that the NCAA, which we all know well now, it only governed men's sports. So the women started to organize themselves, and they formed this organization, AIAW. With the passage of Title IX in 1972 and AIAW in full force, the participation of girls and women in sports skyrocketed. The number of sports offered to women went from 2.5 in 1973 to 6.5 in 1979. About this time, men's sports were around 7.4. It took an additional 17 years to go from 6.5 sports for women to 7.5, and to get it equal with men, as far as sport offerings. Dasha Shilaru was a student at Wayne State University in the 1970s, and she was recruited by Peter Roberts, who is still on staff here at Wayne State, who was our men's swim and dive coach at the time, and he recruited her to dive on the men's team. She led her 2 years on the men's team in 1972 and 73 and 74, 75. She was the first woman in the nation to qualify and compete at the NCAA championships, which was only held for the men, and she competed in the 1 meter and 3 meter diving events. In fact, she finished 13th out of 50 participants, and that's male participants, in the 3 meter diving event, and the top 12 were all Americans. She received her bachelor's degree, master's degree, and medical degrees here from Wayne State University. In 1974-75, Wayne State officially started their women's varsity sports program in the athletics department, and that was volleyball, basketball, field hockey, tennis, fencing, and softball. In the 1980s, Title IX and AIW continued to have its ups and downs. There was pushback, lawsuits, setbacks, and successes. In 1982, the NCAA membership voted to include women, and the majority of the AIAW leaders viewed this as a hostile takeover of women's sports governance, and AIW had no choice but to close their doors. So AIW started with 273 charter members in 1971 and finished and had a total of 1,000 institutional members in 1982 when they were forced to shut down. There were some female leaders that felt by being governed by the NCAA and using the men's model meant that women's sports were finally on equal ground with men's sports. However, the demise of the AIAW meant that women lost their leadership roles. There was a dramatic decline of women coaching women, over 90%, to where we're at today, which is currently 40%. And we really haven't changed much in the last few years. We've been hovering around 40% for some time now. So currently, close to 60% of women's teams are coached by men, and only 3% of men's teams are coached by women. And it doesn't get any better for athletic directors and conference commissioners. All in all, women hold approximately 23% of all NCAA head coaching, athletic director, and conference commissioner positions. And the numbers for minority women are even more dismal. My colleague, Amy Wilson, she got her doctorate degree in Title IX, and she's currently working at the NCAA in the Diversity and Inclusion Office. And she wrote an NCAA report, a Title IX 45th anniversary report, which we celebrated 45 years of Title IX last year. And I thought this quote was in her report was appropriate to share with you today. Quote, "In athletics, Title IX has survived in the face of repeated challenges and resistance. The historical record proves that it has often been difficult for the male-dominated world of sports to share participation opportunities, resources, and power with girls and women. Title IX also faces a growing complacency about the need for the law after 45 years. Since some contend that girls and women have made it in sport and no longer need the support of a federal law," end of quote. Yes, Title IX revolutionized sports in regards to participation opportunities, especially for women. However, in 2018, 46 years after Title IX was passed, women and women's sport teams still face discrimination, and this is why we still need Title IX. I just was thinking about this, but I do want to share with something to you is that regarding the AIW that I realized I didn't share with you earlier, is that they wanted to separate themselves from the NCAA at that time. For women, education was first and foremost. To be eligible for membership in the AIW, you could not offer athletic scholarships to women. Because this was a fundamental part of their educational model of women's athletics, and it was a way to prevent corruption and commercialism that they often saw in the men's model. Now, if these women leaders felt this way in the 1970s, what do you think they're thinking about the status of our college athletics today, especially at the Division I level? So I did want to share with you because that was new for me in doing my research. I'm familiar with the AIW, but that I did not realize as far as what set them apart from the men's model and the NCAA. So recently, Title IX has shifted from mainly a sports law to its coverage of sexual harassment and sexual assault, which will be now discussed by my two panelists. Thank you so much.
So I have learned a lot listening to you. Thank you. I am a little too old to have benefited from Title IX in terms of sports. So my role in this panel, at least as I see it, is in 10 minutes to tell you a little bit about some empirical evidence that we have on sexual assault, a little bit historically, not going back 150 years, a little bit of information from Wayne State, and then we're going to get current information about Wayne State. So the earliest studies that I could find that had empirical information on sexual aggression on college campuses comes from the 1950s and 1960s. actually surprised anyone asked those questions then. I am sure that as early as anyone asked questions, you would have found data, but two sociology professors in Indiana, Drs. Kanan and Kilpatrick, asked these questions. And they found that 20 to 25% of the college women in their studies reported forceful attempts of sexual intercourse by dates in which they ended up screaming, fighting, crying, or pleading. So they were not using a legal definition of rape, but this certainly sounds like serious sexual misconduct by any term that we want to use. And then they also asked men about their acts of sexual aggression, and 26% of the college men reported a forceful attempt to obtain intercourse that caused observable distress in the women. They were a little less blatant in the language they used with men, but again, a quarter of the men were saying they had done something and they saw the woman was distressed. Right, so we have early information about these high rates of sexual assault that really my bottom line is it's been going on a long time, and it's still going on, but I'll give a little more data as I go. I think the best study that was ever done was done by Dr. Mary Koss in the 1980s when we talk about college sexual assaults. Although that's an older study, it was really groundbreaking in a lot of ways. And a lot of her funding came from Ms. Magazine and Gloria Steinem, so I think that's an interesting element, and for those of you who saw Gloria Steinem when she was here. And so what she did was she did a nationally representative sample of college students across the country, and she worked really hard in this study to be sure that she was geographically getting every part of the country, that she was getting 4-year institutions, 2-year institutions, large state institutions, private institutions, so as well as you could to really look at higher education. A lot of studies are convenience samples at one university, so this was really a national study. And she too used this model of not asking people, have you been raped? Have you raped someone? Have you sexually assaulted someone? Because people don't use those terms often when they describe these events, right? I think the Me Too movement and everything has made it clear that we still don't really understand how broadly sexual assault is defined. Plus, laws vary state to state and at the federal level from the state level. So there are many things that I think most of us would agree are morally unethical to do to someone else sexually, but they may or may not be a crime in a certain jurisdiction. So using terms more broadly, like Title IX allows us to talk about sexual misconduct. So in these studies, you ask questions about were certain types of verbal pressure, or was threats, or was physical force, or someone's inability to consent because of intoxication or some other reason, was that involved with someone having sex with someone who was unwilling? So what she found in this national study was that 54% of the college women in the study, so just a little more than half, reported some type of sexual victimization since age 14. So not focusing just on college, but adolescent and adult experiences. And 14 is arbitrary, but people often pick that as an age of being in high school when people are starting to date and have peer-on-peer interactions. For 27% of the women, so just more than a quarter of the sample, the act that occurred seemed to meet a definition of attempted or completed rape. Again, they didn't try to exactly match a legal definition, but it involved physical force or threats of force or someone's inability to consent and to engage in penetrative sex. The 54% includes some type of sexual touching. It's not verbal sexual harassment, it's all some type of touching, but it's not all penetrative sex. So grabbing someone, fondling someone, those types of acts as well. Men were also asked about perpetration. 25% of the men, so again, a number very similar to that first college study, reported some type of perpetration since age 14. Again, this ranged from forcing someone to kiss you to engaging in something that appeared to be a completed rape. So there's a wide range of what happened, but these men were reporting they knew they did something sexual with a woman that she didn't want, sometime between the age of 14 and this point in college. And 8% of those men reported something that appeared to be an attempted or a completed rape. I think we hear more often the numbers about sexual victimization than rates of perpetration, so I just want to comment on that for a minute. I mean, 25% is a huge number, right? 1 in 4. So one thing I want to remind us is this was any act since age 14. So someone with insight into themselves who knew they had forced a woman to kiss them when they were 16 would have said yes to this. So I don't want to say that all these acts were the same, that all of these acts were rape, or all of these would be acts that would be something that we think would put someone in jail. But they were all acts that I think we should have avoided, that as a society, we shouldn't be teaching people that these are appropriate behaviors, right? And the 25% also shows us that we need campaigns that really change our social norms, right? It's not that we're going after a few bad guys and locking them up or making sure they get the right clinical forensic services. Certainly there are some perpetrators that are really extreme and need those kind of services, but this is a much broader societal phenomenon where we, could think about countless movies, countless porn scenes, countless videos and, music, video language, sorry, I was trying to think of an example, but there's so many, it's hard to pick one, right? That clearly make this line between, encouraging someone to have sex and coercing someone to have sex, right? A very fine line and an easy line for some people to cross. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do there, but again, noting that this has been going on for quite some time. It's not a new phenomenon. So in the 1990s, long ago, but I did a study here at Wayne. So I think a lot of us were inspired by Mary Koss's study to want to do something at our own institution. This was before we could do online surveys, so I had to contact deans and department chairs and then professors, and I asked for time to go into classroom. So I asked to go in at the last 15 minutes of class and make a pitch for students to fill out our survey and be in our study. And we worked to make sure we had enrollment that matched registration in the university. So we had engineering classes, computer science classes, as well as humanities classes, dance classes, communication classes, et cetera, nursing, et cetera, anywhere there were undergraduates at the university. We got really good support from people. It was amazing. I'm really thrilled with how that went. We contacted 86 faculty in the end, and 93% of them let us come into their classrooms. Of course, students had the right not to participate, but students who happened to be in class that day and they weren't warned it was happening, so I think that was whatever random causes people to come to class. Only 9% didn't participate, so this is something I think better than when we do online surveys, is people take that personal touch seriously, and they are more willing, I think, to participate. People filled out a survey, paper and pencil, paper and pen, whatever, and put it in a box where you kind of had a slot in it so they could feel like it was very confidential. There was no name or anything on the survey. And we found numbers surprisingly like the numbers that have been found in national studies. So 59% of the women reported that they had experienced an act of sexual victimization since age 14. So it was 54% in that earlier study that I told you, so very similar rates. And 25% of the men, so the exact same number, said that they had reported perpetrated some act of sexual aggression since age 14. So the same numbers as have been found in the national study. So despite Wayne at that time being more of a commuter college than it is now, we were still having rates of sexual violence occur here or to our students, whether it was here or elsewhere, as appear in other parts of the country. And that's not really surprising because when you look at community samples, you find similar rates of sexual violence. So this is not a college issue any more than it is a community issue. It's also a military issue, right? I mean, it happens anywhere that people are, and it's not just something that happens in our society, it happens across the world. So colleges have a special opportunity, right? Because we do have access to young people in a way to, we can create programs and a sense of social norms that might be harder in society at large. But on the other hand, this is a problem that didn't start here and certainly isn't going to end here. And I've focused on these older studies, but more recent studies find very similar rates. So again, we are addressing the problem, we're paying attention to the problem, but we haven't yet made a lot of difference in prevalence yet. So hopefully that's where we're going in this next 20 or so years. So, thank you.
Well,
thank you for the opportunity to be here. I certainly have also learned a lot from my co-panelists, and despite the fact that I work regularly in this area, it's still shocking to hear Dr. Abbey's statistics. So the statute itself, that's the legal definition, and it's been interpreted by our courts to include, so discrimination based on sex includes sexual harassment and sexual assault. As you've learned from my co-host here, it isn't just equity. So my presentation is going to focus on how Wayne State University's fulfills its institutional requirements in the area of sexual misconduct that occurs within the context of our educational programs and activities. It's a lot to cover in 10 minutes. And I'll do my best to try and give you just a practical outline of how we attempt to enforce that here on our campus. So as a practical matter, it means several things. First, Wayne's institutional policies prohibiting sexual misconduct govern all members of our campus community, our administrators, faculty, staff, and students, as well as other participants in our programs and activities such as visitors and vendors. Sexual misconduct includes all types of sexual assault and sexual harassment, which, as you've just heard from Dr. Abbey, covers a broad spectrum of misconduct. In addition, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking will often also constitute sexual misconduct covered by Title IX. And then finally, preventing retaliation, taking some adverse action against an individual because they make a complaint or because they participate in an investigation of someone else's complaint is also covered by Title IX. For our administrative purposes, we refer to the victim or the survival of sexual misconduct as the complainant, and the person who is alleged to have engaged in sexual misconduct is the respondent. So the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, often referred to as the OCR, is the primary agency charged with enforcing Title IX. Beginning in 2011, under the Obama administration, the OCR began to issue regulatory guidance documents, typically referred to as Dear Colleague letters, you may have heard reference to them, to establish enforcement standards relating to Title IX compliance in the area of sexual misconduct. While this guidance does not have the force and effect of law, these guidance documents have had a very sweeping impact on institutions of higher education over the last decade. I think that's been a good thing. The recent events, such as the Nassar scandal at Michigan State University and, of course, the Me Too movement, have continued to give this area heightened scrutiny. So what are Wayne's institutional responsibilities in this area? Well, we're required to do a number of things administratively in order to meet our Title IX obligations. First, train our employees and students about reporting responsibilities and where to report. Provide interim measures such as no contact orders, class or housing changes, as just a few examples. Offer available resources and support to both the complainants and the respondents. This is the biggest one, takes the most time and resources. Conduct a prompt, reliable, and fair investigation of all complaints and take appropriate disciplinary action based upon the outcome of that investigation. Develop programs for prevention and preventative measures, and evaluate patterns of concern and take measures to alleviate those patterns. So as you can see, it encompasses a lot. Reports of sexual misconduct are generally one of two types. A person who believes they've experienced sexual misconduct, the complainant, and a person who has information that sexual misconduct may have been committed by a university student, employee, or a participant in a university program. We call them a reporter. So here at Wayne, all incidents should immediately be reported to the Wayne State Police. We also ask that all incidents be reported to the Title IX coordinator, and currently I'm serving in that function, or to the Deputy Title IX coordinator, who is also our Dean of Students and has, just constant interaction with our student population, or the Director of our Office of Equal Opportunity, which is charged with enforcing non-discrimination on a broad basis. I have some little handouts that you can take to yourself that have those numbers. And what I think it's important for you to know is that if you make the report to the Wayne State Police, they will let me know. I will let them know. We coordinate with each other. So, and that's what my next topic is. What happens when we receive a report? Well, we use a team approach. We work together, the Title IX coordinator, the Dean of Students, the Chief of Police, and his designees or investigators, because usually what they do is assign the case to an investigator who's trained to do this type of work. The Director of Housing, where either the complainant or the respondent lives on campus. The Director of OEO, and the Director of our Counseling and Psychological Services, referred to as CAPS. So our first step is to offer available resources. And I think the most important thing any of us can do to help a complainant is to assist him or her in getting help in dealing with the traumatic effects of sexual misconduct. This can cause a mixture of emotions: fear, anxiety, anger, depression, and guilt. And we've seen that happen over and over. So our first approach is to offer the assistance of CAPS, which is free to all our registered students and confidential. CAPS gives priority to any case involving sexual assault trauma. And of course, in the employment setting, we have our Health Alliance plan, so you can also get counseling services through that. Next, we evaluate the need for interim measures. I told you a little bit. Oftentimes, we'll issue an instruction that the parties should have no contact with each other. And it's kind of done on a two-way street because we want to protect both sides. We want to make sure that we can conduct a fair investigation, and if you have people texting each other and doing things back and forth, it just keeps continuing to inflame the situation and makes it very difficult. The other thing we do then initially is evaluate whether an interim suspension of the respondent is appropriate. Our standard is whether that individual poses a continuing risk of harm if he or she remains on our campus. We don't take that lightly. We really look at it. We do a very case-by-case evaluation to determine of whether or not we feel that is necessary, because of course we also don't want to interfere with somebody's educational opportunities if we don't have to. If we issue that interim suspension, however, it remains in place until final resolution of the complaint. And then next, we begin our investigation. Both the complainant and the respondent have a right to fair and equal treatment throughout the investigative and decision-making process. Both are provided due process as articulated in our Student Code of Conduct, which is generally used for student-on-student cases, or in the university's discrimination and complaint process, which is used where the respondent is an employee. The investigation is pretty detailed. It involves interviews with the complainant, the respondent, and any identified witnesses, and a review of any documentary evidence, which can often include screenshots of text messages and other social media posts. Oftentimes that happens right after an incident, before any no contact order is issued, and it can also oftentimes provide some pretty relevant evidence for us. So as you can see, each investigation is very fact-intensive, and the investigator is required to prepare a thorough and balanced report that should be supported by the evidence, and then makes a recommendation as to whether or not there's sufficient evidence for a violation of university policy. And of course, our policies are compliant with Title IX. So we use a preponderance of the evidence standard administratively, and that simply means that there's, a little bit more, the scales are tipped a little bit in the favor of there's more evidence than not that misconduct occurred. It's a different standard from both our civil standard in our court system and, of course, our criminal standard, which is a very high standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. So once we have a finding that there's a violation, that in cases involving students, the dean of students, in consultation with the Title IX coordinator, implements appropriate disciplinary action. In cases where the respondent is an employee, OEO, the OEO director, in consultation with the Title IX coordinator, recommends a disposition or disciplinary action, and implementation of that action is done by the head of the college, the unit, or the division where the employee works, and any disciplinary recommendations for an employee must also comply with any procedures required by an applicable collective bargaining agreement for any union that employee belongs to. So you can see that our policies, as we implement them, certainly ensure that there are proper due process for a respondent in a case. And both of these processes have appeal procedures. So it takes a considerable amount of time and resources to do these things. Our goal is to get it right and to be fair to both sides. So here at Wayne, we continue to work diligently in this area, and we continue to look for ways to improve. We want a safe and non-discriminatory campus for everyone, regardless of whether or not this area is receiving heightened scrutiny by agencies or the public or the press. It is, simply put, the right thing to do. So one final thing I want to mention, there's a bystander training program that was developed by Dr. Steve Thompson out of Central Michigan University, and he's a frequent speaker in this area. He goes around to various areas. I know athletics recently had been speaking there. But his program, the one I'm referring to, is called No Zebras, No Excuses. And we've had this program presented here at Wayne several times through actual acting out of it. It's a very compelling program, and it's particularly useful in the area of prevention. I'd like to share the concept of this program with you so that each of us can give some consideration as to how we, as a campus community, can stand together in preventing sexual misconduct. We are open to any ideas and suggestions you have. So in summary form, the concept of Dr. Thompson's program goes like this. It all starts with a lion stalking a herd of zebras. The zebras notice and start to scatter and run away. The lion isolates one and brings her down. The zebras outnumber the lion. Standing together, they are more powerful and could eliminate the threat. So I ask you to give some thought to that. How can we as a campus community stand together to improve our campus community safety? And I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you all. I know my mind is racing with a lot of questions. So I want to open it up to all of you, the audience, with your questions for our panelists. And just two super fast things along with the great handouts that you'll want to pick up that Linda has brought from her office. Also, COSW has brought some important and pertinent handouts also. So those are right over there. And then just the other thing is, Dr. Abby, that's so interesting about the survey, because when I've been looking through the CLSW collection at the archives, we actually have all of those confidential survey answers, and I've used them, so interesting. Your name is on there, I think.
So see, this is why this is so valuable, because I'm thinking the next time we do a campus climate survey, we need to get your input and help. We did one last fall. We'll probably be doing one again 2019. It's a huge undertaking, and obviously, we missed the boat, not happening to you.
Well, so, yeah, question.
My question is for Teresa. I was surprised by your final comment about scholarships. Because I guess I've always assumed there's a prevailing wisdom that one of the aspects of Title IX as its application to athletics was that it opened up a whole range of scholarship opportunities for women athletes. And I guess I would wonder how you
Right. I think it's complex, you know, because so, you know, and why I guess is yes, we are providing athletic scholarships for women. I just don't think, you know, we're still not equitable in what the financial support that we're providing for women as we do to men. So we've still got a ways to go there. Not to say that that's taking place in every institution or every school, and including here, but and I also I bring that up because it's something that I have questioned for some time now, being in athletics for 20 plus years, but it's just, you know, I feel that we're losing sight of the goal here, and the goal here is to get an education and to graduate. And you look at how it's trickling down from the professional sports now to the Division I, and you can also see it in how we approach youth sports. So I'm really nervous and no, I shouldn't say nervous, but just really saddened by the state of youth sports, and it's all around getting that athletic scholarship. And what I like to say to parents is there are more academic scholarships out there than there are athletic scholarships, and that's the misconception, that we're going to get a full ride. No, you're not, because the percentage is so low. The percentage of athletes that are receiving a full ride is low. The majority of our student athletes maybe get $1,000, $5,000. You know, there's a range in what that athletic scholarship is, and so we're working so hard to get the money that is put into the amount of money that's spent in youth sports to get this athletic scholarship, when, shoot, you could be putting that toward tuition money. Or, you know, that's where I just think that it's so complex, and there's so many misconceptions out there regarding athletic scholarships. Mm-hmm.
Other questions folks have? Yes.
This is for Linda. I was wondering, how many cases do you see a year, and how long does it take generally to go through one respondent and complaint?
Well, it's a complicated thing in terms of how many, we currently, so I think as of the beginning of the academic year, I've been trying to keep track. I've probably gotten about 50 complaints in the student arena. OEO, we kind of keep it separately, and one of our goals in the next year, once we have a full-time director in place, we've also purchased through the Dean of Students Office a new software system called Maxient, which is state-of-the-art, and we need it. And that will give us the ability to input this stuff into a system where we can pull up statistics and records, et cetera, and it's very protected. You can, you know, protect that only certain people can get certain information on this system. So between the two, I don't have OEO stats currently, but that's actual complaints of incidents, and then once you do your initial, sometimes just the initial assessment where we're looking at what happened, what interim measures do we put in place, do we need to do this, do we need to do that, we can often sort out and find lots of those cases involves an incident that occurred off campus that has nothing to do with the university, but the student is still a victim, and we appreciate that they tell us because we offer them the resources, the same resources. Or it could be an incident between two students that had nothing to do with Wayne. There we might have to investigate if the student wants us to. if it's still having continuing effects, if these two students are interacting. But there are, as you sort them out, some of them are not actual sexual assaults. We've had a couple that were assaults, and we offer them, you can proceed criminally if you want. So in terms of the actual investigation, the cases that turn out to be really, truly sexual misconduct that need to be investigated, we try to get started as soon as possible, and our goal is to complete an investigation within 60 to 90 days. It sounds like that's a long time, but, just setting up appointments to meet with people. I mean, students are busy, and the other thing in play here is that oftentimes the complainant, even though they come forward and want to report it, it's such a traumatic event that it's very difficult for them to actually, oh my God, I now have to go talk to you again, et cetera. So we're looking for ways to minimize how many times they have to do that. What we're seeing now is most respondents want to bring a lawyer with them, okay? I mean, that happens in all our student conduct cases now. Everybody's, I want my lawyer with me. And we generally would allow them to have an advisor if they want to have a lawyer present. I would either be there, I'm not necessarily doing the actual investigations, but I would be there to ensure that the lawyer understands that you're there, this is not a criminal proceeding. Your role is to advise your client. So if you want to take a break and advise your client to maybe not answer questions or whatever you want to do, that's your prerogative. But your role is not to be here interfering with our investigation and advocating for your person. So, when you factor in all of that, and then oftentimes there's follow-up that needs to be done, or there's witnesses in that, it takes time. And then you're putting it all together in a report that is well documented. So, I mean, obviously we'd like to do it in less time, but our goal is 60 days. So, and oftentimes there's more than one investigation going on at the same time, which complicates it even more.
I think I saw another question over here. Yeah, Troy?
After the Me Too movement, you saw a backlash to the Me Too movement and people saying, oh, well, these women are making their stories up. And I don't know that you can, it doesn't ring true to me at all, but, and perhaps you weren't able to track this, but I wondered if you had any sense of or how many cases the respondent is found not to be guilty or commits a criminal case.
I couldn't give you a statistic on it, but certainly there have been a few. I mean, it's not.
I thought Gloria Steinem actually addressed that, didn't she? I thought she had said that, or maybe it was one of the professors that were on stage stating that it's very low, like
Yeah.
as far as made up stories, or like it's just a tool to shush, silence.
Yeah.
But the majority of the stories ring true, are
Yeah.
true.
My experience, just in terms of the campus, is that that's pretty accurate. There are a few cases. Sometimes there's just no evidence to support it, and frequently we'll see complainants that change their mind, and it's a difficult process to go through. I mean, the criminal process is even worse, but even administratively, one of the things we learned in our campus climate survey is that we ask questions like, if you don't come forward, why don't you? And our results were consistent with almost all of the campus surveys that have been done. The number one reason, I think it relates a lot to misperceptions that have existed in our society. I didn't think it was serious enough. And I'm looking at that and saying, oh my God, Or I thought it was a private matter. Or just, I was afraid people would learn this and look at me differently. And that, I guess, gets into the confidentiality privacy issue. We try very hard to keep these matters confidential and private. But, and I see those two differently. Confidential is, you know, a term used legally, like with your patient, attorney-client privilege, physician-patient, counselor privilege. We try to tell our campus community, if somebody comes to you about it, please don't promise them total confidentiality because we expect you to tell us about that. But will you keep their information private? Absolutely. But what we see in the undergraduate area among freshmen and sophomore students, we've seen a lot of situations where everybody's talking about it. They're on social media talking about it, and we can't control that. We advise everybody, please don't share this with anybody. This is a private matter. But I think that's a real concern for complainants is, you know, everybody's going to know this about me now, and they, you know, they're fearful of that. So we do what we can to prevent that, but there's so much education that needs to be done to kind of change some of these misperceptions in our society. Victims, I think, still feel oftentimes it's their fault. And we need to change that.
Well, and, you know, I often think when I hear this kind of question about that woman in New York who carried that mattress around on her head, you know, for much of a year or something. I mean, I think that victim blame has been around a long time, and not believing people's stories or putting a different twist on it. But I think that if, you know, finding ways to be strong and support people who are being strong. So understanding why some victims say that's enough, I can't talk about this, that, you know, that is certainly their right. But for people that feel like they have the strength, you know, to keep talking about it, even if other people don't necessarily believe them, I think that's part of what's different this time with this movement, that we are seeing that, and that ability to get, you know, broad support from others, a good side of social media, right?
Yeah.
Where, you know, that you can find people in other places that, you know, to help keep you motivated, you know, when you start to lag your spirits. So I think that's been a positive way that we just have to kind of keep helping each other as we can. And
One of the things we try to do with our complainants is to tell them, point blank, it takes a lot of courage to come forward. We respect the fact that you're doing this, and we'll do it at your pace. If you need time, if you want a couple of weeks before you want to sit down and talk about this, that's fine. And again, we try to stress the resources because there are a lot of other resources out there besides CAPS.
I have a question. You spoke at the beginning sort of about how litigation against Title IX when it first came out was pretty strong. And I know that there's been like sort of an increase in litigation against civil rights laws in general recently. And maybe this is beyond what you can answer, but has there been an uptick in litigation since, you know, Me Too, that type of stuff? It's kind of brought it back into
One of the things I've seen, and this is just limited, because there's always been, I mean, our office handles litigation as well, so if somebody's claiming, oh, I was dismissed from this program because of discrimination, that's a lawsuit that our office would handle. I've not seen an uptick in that area, but what I see nationally, because of what I read, is that a lot more of the respondents have been suing universities, claiming you railroaded us, you didn't give us due process, you just assumed that whatever the complainant said was true, and I'm guilty, and you kicked me out. I've seen a lot more of those types of lawsuits, and again, without knowing how things were handled within that particular university, they're difficult situations. And, you know, I mean, most of us, I think, saw the press conference last year at Michigan State where the 3 athletes were accused, and, you know, you're seeing court proceedings recorded on TV. There's very little privacy in that area now, but, you know, so that's the only area where I've seen, and I think, you know, that's why we try really hard to make sure, you know, you have to give due process to both sides. You have to give both people the opportunity to say their piece and tell you why they think they weren't responsible.
There was just recently a Division I women's hockey coach, very, very successful, who just won a lawsuit for being dismissed mid-season. And I don't want to misquote here but it was regarding her pay. They couldn't afford to pay her anymore, and so she was let go. She fought it. It was an easy one to win in the eyes of people following this case, but she's now pretty much done. You know, she's ousted. She's a troublemaker. No one's gonna, it's gonna be very difficult for her to try to get back into the coaching ranks. And I know she's even tried to get into the men's ranks and coach there, and men's hockey, and she's been turned down.
How unfortunate that is. Because equal pay, I mean, there's other laws on that, though. Lily Ledbetter.
Well, right, it wasn't just Title IX, it was Title VII, is that?
Yeah.
Title
yeah.
VII.
In the employment arena, they
Yeah.
often are Title VII cases. But that's unfortunate. She's protecting her rights and really helping a lot of other women.
Yes, yeah. Yes.
Do we have any other questions?
I just had a question about the soccer team recently, how they are trying to get equal pay with the men's soccer team. And do you have any comment about that?
Yeah, and I mean, that's where it goes back to, we pump all these resources into the men's sport teams, and these women don't even have a living wage as far as to pursue the world championships, the Olympic, go after the Olympic gold medals. We have this philosophy in supporting men to do that, but we're not doing that for our women, so good for them for standing up and saying, hey, we also deserve the same support and resources, and they're actually more successful currently than our men's program, and so that's, again, where we have to continue the conversation, and I credit, and it was just women's soccer and women's hockey who just won the gold medal this Olympics, yeah.
I appreciated Linda's comments about Dr. Thompson's work, and I guess as we probably get the close of this, what else is broken here at Wayne State that we should be attentive to? And if there's a call to action, what is that call to action for us here?
That's a good question.
I guess
That's a very deep.
I mean,
I don't know if I could answer
we
that.
were talking before about how hard it is to figure out how to involve students, faculty, and staff in a meaningful way in learning about this stuff. It's so easy to present a program at orientation which captivates people, but then how do you carry through with that, right? And no one is going to remember everything they heard or react to it, right? So finding ways to make it a part ongoing of our educational mission, I think it's something,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's not just
Yeah.
Wayne, that's, many institutions are struggling with that, of how do they devote more time and, meaningful time. It's easy to get a lot of emails or, go to this website and take this training that either people delete or they do it as they're, multitasking for other things. So a way to, I think schools that can manage to keep it small and conversational, even though it's hard to get people to come to those, do a better job of actually having people get something out of the experience.
Yeah. I think Dr. Abby's kind of highlighted that. We're on information overload in our society, and when you think about college students, everything they have going on, we can get the information out to them, but whether or not they read it or participated in it is very hard. So we have to find newer, better ways to reach them so that they understand what information is available to them and how we handle things here. I think that's a challenge. I think athletics has more of a captive audience with their students that way, which is why they can bring in and say, okay, every student has to attend this, or you're not going to be playing. And that enables them then to bring people in and do talks. And I know when we did the live presentations of the No Zebras, it was very challenging to get people to come to it. It was there, and we're thinking, oh my God, this is such a valuable program, you can learn from it. But, it's hard to get that kind of participation unless it's mandatory, and I don't know how you make it mandatory. It's very difficult. So I think that's a challenge. I know that from because Title IX coordinators in the Michigan Publics, we meet twice a year and we, share information, talk about ideas, what works, doesn't work. And that's a challenge for all of us in terms of how do you educate your campus community about all the information that we have available.
Well, with that, I think we're at time. I know this conversation literally could go on all day, but I am so grateful to each of you guys for speaking and bringing your knowledge and your expertise here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.